Welcome, everybody. It's 2:30 here in Geneva, so we are ready to start. I cannot see the participants, so I'll probably just start, and hopefully some more people will join us later. So, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Roberto Forin. I'm the Deputy Director at the Mixed Migration Center, which is part of the Danish Refugee Council.
Okay.
I'll now open this side event, and then I will give the floor to my colleague Aurelia later from West Africa for the facilitation of the panel discussion. So we are welcoming you today to this side event at the International Migration Review Forum, co-sponsored by the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, and the Mixed Migration Center, and focusing on youth mixed migration in gateway cities in West Africa. Youth migrants, both male and female, represent today a disproportionately large share of migration flow into transit cities. Many are unaccompanied and lack the financial resources and social network needed to lead a good life and thrive, hopefully contributing meaningfully to their community of origin, transit and destination. The need to gather data on demographic profile, drivers, needs and motivation of the specific vulnerable group in urban transit hub has been clear for years. And in fact, is in those transit locations where mixed migration is the norm and traditional source of information remain, unfortunately, sketchy. In line with the Objective 1 of the GCM, UNFPA, in partnership with MMC and with the support of the government of Denmark, has been collecting and analyzing data on young international migrants in seven transit cities in two phases between 2017 and 2021. Phase 1 mostly in North Africa and phase 2 in West Africa. This project has been a very important and successful initiative for many reasons, but I would like to mention two today. First of all, it has somehow been playing a pioneering role. We started data collection on youth in transit city already back in 2017. Since then, the attention on both youth, cities, and transit location has been steadily increasing, leading to several projects and initiatives very well represented this day at the IMRF and by the text of the GCM itself. As MMC, we are part of a few of those initiatives with our primary data collection initiative, the 4MI, and this was made possible also through what we learned as part of our partnership with UNFPA, to whom we are extremely grateful. Second, the project is a very clear attempt to put the voice of youth, refugees, and migrants at the center stage, not only as beneficiary of program and policy responses, but as active player in the setting of priority and discussion about responses. We strongly believe that this is crucially important for a successful implementation of the GCM. In order to understand migrants' vulnerability, which is the Objective 7 of the GCM, you need to talk to them and engage directly with them, which is the Objective 1 on data. So the link between the two objectives, 1 and 7, is crucial, and we hope that our project has contributed to more firmly establish this link. But I'll stop here, and perhaps we can have a very quick look at the agenda. So we will start with some opening remarks from Denmark and the IOM. Afterward, a representative from UNFPA will present the main result of phase 2 of the project, followed by a statement of the research result by the government of Mali. We will then continue with a panel discussion on the implication for the GCM implementation and some closing remarks. But now, without further ado, I'm very pleased and honored to give the floor to Ambassador Ruge from Denmark for some opening remarks. Ambassador, you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto. And thank you very much to UNFPA and to the Mixed Migration Center for organizing this important side event and for giving me the opportunity to deliver the opening remarks. I'll try to be brief because we only have an hour and it's an important topic that we want to have time to discuss. Human mobility is a key feature of the globalized world of the 21st century, or to use the words of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres when he opened the IMRF plenary session in New York yesterday, migration is a fact of life. The current scale of migration and displacement, however, is on the rise, and it has a young face, and it's more female than ever. In times of conflict, youth are amongst the most vulnerable. Young migrants are often unaccompanied, traveling with limited resources and without their usual safety nets. They are at risk of having their needs and rights, including sexual and reproductive health and rights, overlooked. Young people, particularly women and girls, are highly vulnerable in this regard. These are the harsh realities. In order to identify and secure the needs of young migrants in urban settings and urban transit hubs, we need reliable, timely, and detailed data about the people affected. What are the drivers and aspirations of young migrants in urban hubs? What are their needs when it comes to access to healthcare, for instance, and what can be done to improve access to such services? In search of answers to these questions, Denmark is proud to have supported the important work that UNFPA and the MMC have undertaken to identify the needs of young migrants in transit cities. We've done that with $2.6 million between 2017 and 2021. In line with the Global Compact, development partners in West Africa who have been involved in this study will be able to design programs and interventions for the benefit of affected groups. We wish to see more studies that could be replicated in other regions to cover the diversity of drivers of mixed migration, as well as the life experiences of the young migrants in major gateway cities. Thanks to your extensive work, we are one step closer to addressing the needs of young migrants in vulnerable situations. UNFPA and the Mixed Migration Center are both very close partners of Denmark. Denmark supports UNFPA with an annual core contribution of around $32 million, and we're about to finalize a new multi-year and softly earmarked contribution of $4.2 million with MMC. It's a pleasure to witness the synergies and results of your extensive collaboration here today. Before I pass the floor, I want to underline that data itself is not enough to solve the challenges of mixed migration flows. We, governments, have a responsibility to act. We must mainstream gender and age into all aspects of migration, in programs, policies, and in laws. And we need to cooperate more closely with civil society and the international community to turn knowledge into concrete actions. I believe the IMRF, which is taking place right now here where I am in New York, is a unique platform for the facilitation of such cooperation. Let me end by once again expressing my deepest gratitude to UNFPA and the Mixed Migration Center for your work and for organizing this side event. We look forward to hear more about the key findings and your recommendations for our future cooperation on the important task of reducing the vulnerabilities of young migrants in gateway cities. I wish you all a fruitful discussion today, and thank you very much. I'll pass the floor back to you, Roberto.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your excellent opening remark and kind words. Thank you. And now I'd like to give the floor to Madame Sophie Nonnenmacher, if she has joined us. I think she was running a bit late, and so we are actually not sure if she managed to join us. Are you with us, Sophie? Okay, apparently not. So if she comes later, we will of course make sure that she can still say a few words, but meantime, we can perhaps skip to the next section, the presentation with Sandile Simelan, a technical division UNFPA, which I'm sure she's here. Is here, sorry. So Sandile, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roberto. Let me share the screen.
So Sandile, you have 20 minutes and a bit more since Sophie has not joined us yet. I'll let you know when you get close to the time.
Okay. Can you please confirm if you can see the...
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thanks again, Roberto, and good day to everyone in attendance, wherever you are. My name is Sandilis Melane. I come from the Population and Development Branch in the Technical Division of UNFPA. Today, I'm presenting results from the Youth Mixed Migration Study conducted by UNFPA and the Mixed Migration Center in 3 gateway cities in West Africa, as introduced by Roberto a few moments ago. I will start off with the quick introduction of the study. So basically, the study focuses on young international migrants in the age range 15 to 29 years in major gateway cities. As Roberto indicated, thus far, 2 phases of the study have been completed between 2017 and 2021, covering 7 cities. The presentation today is focusing on the results from phase 2, which covered 3 cities in West Africa, namely Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, and it was conducted between 2019 and 2021. This was also reflected by Roberto in his opening remarks. The study basically is in line with Objective 1 of the Global Compact on Migration. And it collects data on socio-demographic profile of the young migrants in transit cities. And it also collects information about the drivers of migration, both push and pull factors. And lastly, it also collects policy and service needs of the young migrants while en route to the transit cities, and also when they are in the identified mega cities. By design, the study uses a mixed methods approach and collects both qualitative and quantitative data. The focus today is on the results from a survey of a total of 2008 young migrants in the 3 cities that are the focus of the study. And the sample for this part, the phase 2, was selected using purposive and snowballing approach, which basically means the sample by the way it's designed is not necessarily representative of migrants in the countries that are affected or in West Africa in general. But there's a lot of information that we can learn from the responses that were collected. The seed sample for the entire sample was obtained from community key actors such as community leaders, NGOs that are already in contact with the young migrants in different capacities. By virtue of the study being conducted in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to adapt our methodology to accommodate telephone-based interviews when applying our structured questionnaire. Participation in the study was voluntary and anonymous, and care was taken to protect the privacy of the participants. In terms of the participants, we used the following criteria to select. First, as I indicated earlier on, the youth migrants should be in the age range 15 to 29 years in age, and they were currently living in the transit city at the time of the survey. They are not nationals or permanent residents of the survey country, and they had crossed an international border to be in the city. And more importantly, they define themselves as being in transit, meaning that they are in the city temporarily because they intend to go to another destination country. Briefly on the profile of these migrants. The data shows basically that for migrants that were found in Ouagadougou, the most predominant countries, sending countries are Benin, Ivory Coast, and Togo. In Bamako, it's Guinea, Ivory Coast, and Burkina Faso. This analysis, for most of the analysis about the sending countries, we used information about the departure country, meaning the country where they last left before they were interviewed in the transit city. In total, we surveyed 2008 young migrants fitting the criteria that I just described. And ultimately, the sample was predominantly male, 61% of them. And we also found that a majority of them, of the young migrants, had proper identification, which basically suggests that they are in a regular migration situation. 3/4 of the migrants indicated that they were embarking on this journey for the first time. And 2/3 of them also reported that they have someone to rely on in case something goes wrong in the transit city. Also, we found that the sample in Ouagadougou compared to the ones in Niamey and Bamako was predominantly comprising more students. Lastly, about 2/3 of the migrants do not intend to migrate outside Africa. They want to remain within the continent. Now we'll quickly focus, briefly review the key drivers of migration. This slide shows data for the top 8 departure countries, accounting for about more than 75% of all the migrants in the sample. The key highlight from the slide is basically that economic and personal or familial reasons were the primary drivers of migration in these countries. Basically, they are the main push factors, and the results are consistent whether you disaggregate by sex of the respondent or by the country where they departed from. Now, regarding pull factors, the data show that educational opportunities are the main reason for the choice of Ouagadougou as the transit city. Whereas for Niamey and Bamako, the main pull factors for the migrants in there was the fact that those two cities lie along a simpler route to the countries that they intend to go to. We will switch over now to examining life of these migrants en route to the gateway cities, and as well as when they are already in the city. The study collected information on the health impact of the health impact en route for among these migrants, and the results show that 1/3 of them felt that their health was put at risk during their trip to the transit city, and these perceptions differ by sex of the respondent and also by the route that they followed to going to the city. The factors that are highlighted as having impacted the health of the migrants during the journey include, the main ones include exhaustion, lack of food, and pre-existing illnesses that they had even before they embarked on the journey. Responses to a question on perception about life in the transit city show that proportionately more migrants in Bamako find their stay in the city harder than expected. Whereas in Niamey, we find that more migrants find life easier than expected. Responses to a question about safety in the transit city show that migrants in Bamako generally feel the least safe compared to those in the other two cities, and those in Ouagadougou reported proportionately higher levels of being safe in the city. Maybe I should add here that this result is kind of is consistent with information that we also collected in the study about the availability of someone to rely on should something go wrong. So that data shows that in Ouagadougou, more young migrants have someone to rely on in the case of trouble, and in Bamako, the opposite was true. In terms of access to health services in the three cities, we found that in Niamey, the young migrants generally had lower access to healthcare. 42% and 34% of female and male migrants, respectively, reported not having access to health services. The data also shows wide sex differentials in this access to services in Bamako. Regarding barriers to access to the healthcare services, the study shows that its cost of the services and lack of knowledge of where to find the services that are the main barriers to access. This for us was kind of a big. It's in contrast to findings that we picked up from phase 1, where lack of ID came up as one of the primary barriers to access to services. Here, the lack of ID is not a big deterrent for access to services. Rather, it's the cost and the lack of knowledge of where the services are located in the city. On access to contraceptives, the study shows that in Ouagadougou, more female migrants do not know where to access contraceptives compared to male migrants. And the opposite is true in Niamey and Bamako. The data also shows wider sex differentials in the case of Bamako. The study also collected information about sexual behavior of the young migrants and asked a question about their engagement in transactional sex in the past 12 months before the survey. And the results show that about a quarter of the young migrants reported engaging in transactional sex. And among these, more women than men received or a gift or money in exchange for sex. More men than women had given a gift or money in exchange for sex. When asked if they would migrate, they would still choose to migrate given what they had experienced and what they know now. The data shows that a majority of the migrants would still attempt to get to their intended destination country, regardless of how old they are. This is consistent with what we also found in phase 1 of the study. And it kind of points to these migrants embarking in these journeys, not necessarily out of choice, but it's more like a question of survival. It's a question of death or you move. Briefly focusing on a case study of Bamako. A total of 501 respondents were surveyed in this city, again, predominantly male, with the 3 main sending countries being Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Ivory Coast. The reasons for the choice of Bamako as a transit city, we find in the data that they differ by country of departure. We see in the slide here that for migrants from Senegal, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Algeria, Bamako is the simplest route to their intended destination. Whereas for migrants from Cameroon and Benin, job opportunities and connection, possibilities of reunion with family and friends were the main pull factors to this city. This slide shows perceptions about risks to minors, that is children under 18, while en route to Bamako. It basically shows that these perceptions differ by the country of departure, and they include in the main physical violence, kidnapping, and death. When they are already in the city, Bamako, this slide shows that the main perceived risks to the minors include theft of belongings, sexual and physical violence, kidnapping, and detention. The study also collected information about information that is needed by the migrants to continue with their journey. And the results show that the main information regards cost of the journey, safety and security along the way, as well as conditions, general conditions of the route. I will now switch over to some recommendations that we think the data supports. The first one is that it seems from the data that it is a noble thing for countries, whether regardless of whether they are sending or receiving, to create opportunities for young people by implementing multi-sectoral programs which integrate job creation with other types of interventions that address training, health, housing, food security, and civic action, so that migration should be a choice, not a question of survival. And this particular recommendation is in line with the Africa-wide aspiration for harnessing demographic dividends in the region, capitalizing on the young age structures. So if countries can embrace these investments in these areas, indeed they stand a chance of improving opportunities for harnessing the demographic dividend. Also, it is recommended that development partners should enhance efforts to regularly collect accurate, timely, disaggregated data to improve our understanding of youth mixed migration and to inform evidence-based policies, again in alignment with the Objective 1 of the Global Compact on Migration. Also, development partners should provide access to services and protections for young migrants during their journeys and when they are in the gateway cities. We should also promote access to information and services among youth, including services on health, particularly sexual and reproductive health, regardless of migration status. This is also featuring prominently in the objectives of the Global Compact on Migration. Lastly, we should generate youth-led knowledge and advocacy and enhance efforts to prevent and combat the risky sexual behaviors, including transactional sex among young migrants, because such behaviors can predispose these young migrants to diseases, including HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases. I will end, Program Director, by acknowledging the governments of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso for permitting the study to take place in their countries, and also the total of 2008 young migrants who agreed to participate in the study in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also great admiration for to the enumerators and other stakeholders, including NGOs, who provided constant support, who continually provide support to vulnerable young migrants. And last but not least, a huge thanks to the government of Denmark for providing financial support to the two phases of the study thus far. And we do hope that opportunities to work on other phases of the study will open up in the future, including other partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandile, for the very interesting presentation, recommendation, and acknowledgement. We are looking forward to hear from Sibide Musa from the government of Mali. But before that, we would like to give the floor to Sophie Nonmacher from IOM. Sorry for not managing to do it before. You apparently were there, but the microphone was not collaborating as it should have been. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you to UNFPA and to the Mixed Migration Center for inviting IOM today. As I was supposed to give opening remarks and to put this excellent presentation that you just heard about this new and very important report which has just been released, it's a little bit awkward that now I'm going to speak about generalities. But I think it's still important to understand the importance of the work which has been carried forward by UNFPA and the Mixed Migration Center. So if you think about it, I think it's very relevant to have this kind of conversation in the context of Africa for two reasons. The first one is in this region, and especially in West Africa, we are still lacking essential data on migration, and we find data on the type of issues that have just been discussed by the previous speakers and in the introduction. The second reason why it's important, if you think at the continental level, you have to keep in mind that today, 1 out of 4 migrants in Africa is a child. So this kind of dynamic youth mobility is an extremely important pattern in the continent and in the region. To put further things into context, in West Africa, you need to have in mind that we are speaking about a stock of around 7.6 million international migrants in the region, and it was already mentioned that most of this this regional mobility is intra-regional. Having said that, there's also a percentage of this movement which goes further down the road, either to North Africa or further, including towards Europe. And in the context of this movement along the road of the Central Mediterranean route, I think it's very important to have in mind that what we see is particular vulnerability of youth, migrant, and children. So to just give you also perspective with former studies which have been carried out, for example, in 2018, IOM did a study where we interviewed around 56,000 children along this road, and most of them reported to have suffered some form of exploitation. This study was completed with another report with UNICEF, which also said that youth were particularly vulnerable to abuse, sexual exploitation, and other forms of human rights abuses. And this included, to be very concrete, around 72% of the 1,100 people we interviewed. Among all these girls, 72% of the girls were saying that they had experienced sexual exploitation, and 86% of the 10,000 boys we interviewed at that time having suffered a sort of form of forced labor. So this is really important. I don't want to take too much of your time because I think the previous speaker give you really a very nice and detailed understanding of the situation of today. So I just wanted to say that when we speak about this kind of issue, which raise very important concerns in terms of protection, we also have to keep in mind the importance of this youth mobility as a positive factor and driver for development in the region. So we have to have the vulnerability, the protection angles, which is important, but also we also have to understand how much this youth mobility bring also in terms of exchange of ideas and potential for growth in this region of West Africa. I had a few conclusion recommendations that I wanted to share with you, but because the previous speakers, I think he already stated the same type of conclusion about the necessity of having more data, more information, of the necessity because we have a lot of intra-regional movement to have also to not only to strengthen protection policy at the national level, but also to do so at the level of the region within the context of the ECOWAS, but also at the continental level, especially in the framework of this African Integration and Free Movement Protocol on the way. So with that, I would like to thank you again for inviting IOM to this very important side event and to congratulate UNFPA and the Mixed Migration Center for this excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, very interesting because you could also and already reflect a little bit on the presentation. So not too bad that you actually spoke now. So thank you very much for your words, recommendation, and praise. And now I'd like to give the floor to two representatives from the government of Mali and government of Niger for their statement. The first is Mr. Sibide Moussa from the National Sahel Women Empowerment and Demographic Dividend. project coordination of Mali. So, Mr. Sibide Musa, the floor is yours. Etienne,
Oui.
thank you.
Bonjour, vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Très
Très bien, oui.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Bonjour
Great.
à
Thank you very much.
de
And hello, everyone.
participer à
Thank you for having us
Et
as participants at this session.
je voudrais préciser que le Mali
I would like to add to what was said that Mali
des migrants
is a state where
de Mali et Bamako particulièrement est une ville
migrants start their journey, but Bamako is likewise a city that receives a lot of migrants during their transit elsewhere. This is also a historic feature of Mali. We have economic and cultural aspects and security concerns and other aspects which encourage the different movements, whether towards Mali or to a neighboring country. So that is a reality you all know about us. What I have to say is the point of view of the government of Mali, but it isn't a matter of saying that we need to validate the results of the study as such. We do not need to go through a formal validation. Were it the case, there are already sociological studies on that, but my perspective is merely technical, and I would reflect upon a number of aspects related to the results that have been shared. The countries of origin are mere observations, which we have seen ourselves, actually. We know very well that people come from Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Burkina, or elsewhere, and that is very real indeed. The impressions shared by the individuals who were interviewed are truly their impressions and the situations that they have gone through and lived. It is not to be discussed as such. I think what would matter most here would be to discuss the recommendations that have been shared, and I think that is what we need to work on. For starters, I think it should be said that the government of Mali has always been committed to protecting all peoples, whether they be from Mali or in transit in the country. And that is due to the fact that our migratory policy is based on receiving migrants. Of course, many people leave Mali. I'm sorry, can you hear me? I hear someone else speaking. There's another microphone open. Okay. So many people leave our country and have done so for a number of decades now. And what matters most to us is to protect our fellow citizens, those who are not within our territory. That is what generates to us the duty to protect anyone on our territory and to offer all possibilities we have at hand. We allow free access to any service and any infrastructure available to all Malian citizens through the government and through development partners who wish to intervene and to accompany the government and its partners to make sure appropriate services are provided to the entire population and to the vulnerable population in particular, regardless of their country of origin. Were we to deal specifically with certain subjects related to vulnerable peoples, then let me assure you that the Malian government is always ready to assist anyone on the territory, whether they be a resident or someone in transit. Those are some of the aspects I wanted to share about you regarding Mali's migratory policy. And I would like to underscore here that all entities in the country are committed to do so and to help people in transit overcome any difficulties experienced so that everyone can feel comfortable within our country. We know security concerns are currently exacerbated, but to us, Bamako had never been a big concern except for the latest times, and we hope that this will somehow become a distant memory, because we are working on reinforcing our security and trying to do our best to make sure everyone feels comfortable here. That is pretty much everything I wanted to share with you today, and I thank you very much for allowing me to do so.
Monsieur Moussa, pour votre...
Roberto, for speaking. Thank you, Mr. Moussa, for your intervention. We will now yield to Mr. Ibrahim Malangoni, the General Director of the Civil State for Migrants and Refugees within the Ministry of the Interior in Niger. Welcome, Mr. Malangoni, you have the floor. Ibrahim Malangoni speaking. Thank you very much, Mr. Roberto. Thank you for allowing us to join you today for this first session of the International Forum on Migration as a side event. As you know, Africa doesn't generally have reliable data on mixed migration. And of course, it is also our case. We have missing information on migratory flows, and the understanding of those flows and the experience of people in the migratory route is not well known, in spite of what we're doing, because of course we do try to improve at that level, but we try to gauge health needs and the needs to protect mixed migrants. Within the region, the UNFPA has partnered with the Mixed Observatory on Migrants and Refugees in our country and in 2 other countries as well. So there has been a project in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which is underway in order to protect young migrants from 15 to 19 years of age in Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey. Our purpose is to facilitate the championing and the protection of the youth by providing health services, among others, whether they be in transit or residents of these 3 African agglomerations. With the project, we have been able to work with migrants in our countries, and I will speak here in particular of migrants in Niamey, in Niger, where the demographic profile of migrants has shown that they look for different incentives which bring them here, but their needs are common in terms of health services and security services. They have quantitative and qualitative data that has been analyzed, and we have already seen the results. But as you will know, in Niger, we receive hundreds and thousands even of migrants every year in our territory. For the most part, they are young, and they go through our country to reach either Maghreb or Europe. These migrants tend to stay in Niamey for a rather long period. And that is why the UNFPA, in choosing to undertake this study in our capital, has allowed us to study the population that is in transit in our capital city and to gather data on the statistics relating to transit migrants in Niamey. As for the qualitative study, which has underlined a number of other needs of migrants, namely for their health and reproductive health and for their conditions of travel, I would say that that will allow us to better provide for their needs in the entire country in general, not just in Niamey. I will not go over the results that have been shared once again, but based on the results that were presented, which are very enriching, we see the importance of meeting to agree on a framework for migration and to discuss the needs of these migrants and to establish a national policy of immigration, as has been the case in 2020, because the government here did adopt a policy. But we had thought that in doing so, we would be able to align our migratory policies with the international regulations. Through its commitment for good governance of migratory policies, the government adopted a 5-year plan. And thanks to the UNFPA's study, we could enhance our plan, our 5-year plan, to fight against the contingencies related to migration and to improve our protection of migrants. This is all a part of our reference document in terms of migration. And we are actually planning to organize a roundtable on the mobilization of resources for the implementation of this policy soon. By allowing us to participate as a ministry, the UNFPA allowed us to have a study which will, in the end, be of use for our championing and for the implementation and enhancement of our policy. I have nothing but words of appreciation for UNFPA, who has constantly been at our side to help us improve our protection of the population we have. Thank you very much for your attention. Roberto speaking. Thank you very much. Thank you for your statement, Mr. Malangoni. On behalf of the UNFPA, I would like to thank you. And moving on, since we are a bit late, I will give the floor to my colleague Aurelia Donard, who coordinates the activities of the Mixed Migration Center in West Africa and North Africa as well. She will be in charge of facilitating the discussions of the panel. Aurelia, over to you. All yours. We cannot hear Aurelia, sorry.
Il faut que tu unmute, Aurelia. Ou il faut que quelqu'un, Étienne peut-être, voilà.
Vous m'entendez?
Vas-y.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Roberto, and thank you all. Greetings. I will be in charge of moderating the discussion panels, starting with the research director in Senegal and the director of the African Migration Study Network, Professor Foldemba. The study of the UNFC and the UNFPA in the region has followed your lead, and you have studied the health, and in particular the health, the sexual and reproductive health studies of migrants. So I wanted to ask you what the role of the academic sector and the UNFPA can be, as what would be the role of the Migration Center. And I also wanted to know whether you're currently researching or drafting any considerations on the migration of youth, and if you have any other considerations that we should take into account. Yes, I hope you can hear me okay. This is Foldemba speaking. Thank you for having invited me, and thank you for these two questions that you have asked me. I think I could discuss the matter at length, but I would actually like to highlight one matter which I think is essential, and that is the fact that the demographic questions and the question of mobility in general have attracted the research world progressively, and this is a growing area of interest. So I think we should document these matters of mobility with good accuracy levels. And I think what should be recalled is that every study and every research has its own purposes. Now, each study will generate a result or a knowledge that adds on to what we had before. And that allows us to understand the dynamics where we cannot do everything and anything. And it is true that speaking of migration of youth and this vulnerable category, such as women, we cannot go without saying that the migratory population is present everywhere, regardless of the migratory status. So the contribution of our university to this type of work is of importance to us because we always work within the framework of different programs. So to give you an example, in Senegal, I work at the Sheikh Anta Diop University in Dakar. We have a number of research units that deal with mobility questions, and that is what they study. But those are but one aspect of the demographic studies that we have, but one aspect of the aspirations of emancipation that we study. So based on these reports, we are then able to consider what partnerships we can establish. So what's the point of having the knowledge on these demographic factors, and what are the potential synergies between the different sectors? Of course, working on mobility in isolation doesn't do much for us. And I think what we should insist on, and this is the main thing, is that we should collaborate. We should all establish common purposes and see what we can each add or contribute with. What can we help get a clearer idea of? I think it can be said that we are more than willing to take part in any study that will produce knowledge. And we are trying to bridge the gaps, because of course there are areas on which we have no documentation. In certain areas we have a certain degree of knowledge, but not in depth. And with every study, we are opening and paving the way for further studies. Our university is interested in the different studies, in the different data produced, and we try to add that to our axis of reflection to say, okay, we have no documentation on this subject. So perhaps this unit should work on documenting that information. But it doesn't help understand everything about migration because there is so much more to know. That is what I wanted to say to answer to your first question. And then as for the studies that exist, and I was happy to hear you mention work in our 3 countries of the region, but that added up to other studies underway on the mobility of women in West Africa. You spoke of youth, and that includes young women, of course, but what was evident based on the studies that we led regarding feminine mobility was the importance of women when it came to mobility. And there is a growing share of women who migrate. And we speak of this phenomena without being able to measure them. The recent study that was undertaken in 9 countries, with the support of the French Development Agency, showed that women have a growing participation, a growing stake, and that is a factor of participation. And we saw, as you underlined, that Burkina Faso had been at the heart of that, because the university aspect of these youth appeared, and it is of importance.
For these studies, and I will send you some reference to work with a group of Dakar, comes to provide further information about a transit population with one specific focus on women. And I believe this is very good for the research community, because it's always interesting to know what the others are doing, because we cannot step on each other's toes, but we cannot ignore what others are doing. That's why I believe that collaboration is so important. And hence the information, the documents, whatever is done elsewhere, and that everybody else also takes advantage of what we are doing. And I'm sure we will have further things to be developing with that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I believe indeed that a coordination extremely important in the world of research. And indeed, especially when another important question comes about, which is the women of feminine migration and the mobility of women in the framework of their situation as youngsters. So thank you again for your presentation. I will now give the floor. Sorry if I mispronounced Mr. Brown Amare.
If I may, I will ask you as well two questions related to your intervention. You have done some research on youth migration decisions in sub-Saharan Africa. And in your opinion, how does the evidence presented today fit within the existing knowledge? I think Dr. Fall already mentioned that we complement each other, but perhaps you have also something to add to this question. And how can policymakers concerned about youth mixed migration in urban hubs design policies to react the benefits of urbanization while avoiding its negative consequences? I believe you also have a PowerPoint, so perhaps Etienne, if you can guide, or Mr. Amare, if you want to share your screen, the floor is yours.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Amare, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you for UNIPF and Mixed Migration Center for this invitation. So I had a PowerPoint, but because of the time constraint, I'm going to give a brief discussion on that. So we have been working on like youth migration decision in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is satellite-based empirical evidence from Nigeria. So our interest here is in understanding the potential drivers of migration in Sub-Saharan Africa by drawing on evidence and recent trends in Nigerian urban growth on youth migration. So we are it is known that economic benefits of urban growth, and which is increasingly being recognized, but there is also a general based need to better understand how this have influenced further rural urban migration. So for this study, we used national representative longitudinal data from LSMS data, and we combine it with satellite-based nightlight data. using a geolocalized reference of households. So we exploit a spatial and temporal difference in light intensity between these two spatial units before migration takes place. So we examined the implication of difference in levels of urban growth between the migrant destination and the origin of migration. So we used pre-migration difference before they migrate. So we identify the nightlight of the origin, and then we also identify the nightlight or urbanization at the migration destination. So urbanization and higher disparities between the points of origin in rural areas and destination in urban areas capture through difference in light intensity, which is likely induce use migration. So we assume that difference in light intensity are likely indicative of rural-urban difference in infrastructure, access to services, and employment opportunities, and leading to a growing out migration. So let me summarize the key findings of the paper. So around 43% of the migrants are migrated from an area where nightlight intensity is 0. And around 8% are likely to migrate from 0 to 4% of light night intensity at migrant origin. And also around 54% of migrants is likely to migrate to higher night light intensity. And also we also disaggregate the migration into temporary migration, permanent migration, long distance migration, short distance, and economic migration. So we find that around more than 70% of the migrants to long distance and economic migrants are migrate to higher nightlight intensity or to higher urban areas. So urban growth in neighboring areas induce out migration. This can increase unemployment and result in overloaded public services in urban centers. This evidence reinforce the policy concerns that urban growth that is not linked to rural development can induce rural-urban migration and hence place a burden and a constraint on urban natural and public resources. We also disaggregate our results by different characteristics of use. So we find use exhibit heterogeneous behavioral response in their migration decision, suggesting there are varying incentive as well as push and pull factors to migration. So in order to slow the high migration of youths to urban areas, as in many sub-Saharan African countries, policymakers may need to more interventions that can address varying incentives and responses that induce and sustainable phenomena. Access, for example, access to farmland and productivity, enhancing investment in the agricultural sector may encourage youth to engage in agriculture while still taking advantage of short-term opportunities to migrate. Similarly, while rural-urban migration may boost economic benefits efficiency, the benefit is seriously impaired by accompanying pressure on urban infrastructure and services, as well as urban use unemployment. So this use from farm households and in areas where exposed to drought and shortfall in rainfall and conflict are more likely to migrate. And also we found that use exhibit heterogeneous response to urban growth, suggesting variation in incentives and underlying cause of migration. So individuals with better access to physical assets, land, and higher education are more likely to respond to urban growth and take up seasonal economic migration. We also find that women are more likely to migrate, but they are less likely to migrate to urban areas because of the physical assets and their education level and so on. So one of the limitation of this paper could be is just this is the data is used for agricultural household model. So there could be underestimation of the migration activities and migration disaggregation. So further research on like using like focused migration data will increase and will have benefit for future research. Thank you very much.
You're not audible, Aurelia.
Hello?
Microphone.
Yes, now you're good.
Good. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Amare. Thank you very much for your intervention. I think indeed looking at migration in between rural zones is also something that is interesting, especially nowadays. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go a little bit faster and introduce you to Professeur Ndiaye, qui est notre troisième panéliste.
Who is our third panelist this morning. You are president of the Alliance of the University of Hi, good morning. How fine, and you? Thank you for being with us today. What is your question? We have two questions. What are the consequences of the result of the study on the implementation of the measures for the young, especially the young women, and what does that mean for the implementation of the Global Compact? Thank you for giving me the floor. And the Danish MMC for allowing for this work to proceed in certain countries of our region. Some countries that are absolutely key. This is very important that you have focused this study on the young population and for thinking about a secure mobility between the young women and men in the different countries of the sub-region. This study does not show, and it's a pity that you just can guess it. And I would say there is an additional mobility of the young in most of the African countries, especially in Western Africa, that has more than 33% of the African sub-Saharan population. So it's a highly populated area with wide surfaces like Mali, but it is also a region with high population density.
Excusez-moi de vous interrompre. On vous entend, mais il y a un problème de.
We hear, but we have a connection problem. Maybe you can cut off your camera so we can use the bandwidth only for the sound. Thank you, madam. Okay. I'm sure we have. I'm also late regarding what you're saying. I hear everything a little later. A little bit better, yes, a little bit better. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm far from the continent right now.
Mais je vous remercie de... Voilà. Alors, il y a un problème.
There is one problem of demographic growth in the countries you have chosen. Of the age sections that need to undergo some kind of education. These three countries will turn into mega cities by 2050. Most of these Western African countries will have overcrowded cities. You have to multiply the present numbers by 2 or 3, and the youngsters will be extremely very important, the ones that you have included in your study. Therefore, it is important to train them and to give them the possibility of living properly. And migration is a part of this whole picture. Because it allows the young to migrate properly, and you have seen that most of these, they have their traveling papers in order, and this is of course extremely important by itself. In conditions, whether they do or they don't have their papers, I think the trend is towards becoming more and more abiding by the law because of what happens in the other countries. That's why there is a risk of violence that is expected, that comes out of the study. And I think that is very important. You have to allow. This is something that comes to add to the culture of our population, to the economy, and to the training of our young population. These are things that are at the heart of what we are looking for. So the consequences of such a phenomenon I'm sorry to interrupt, says Sophie, but we really cannot follow you because it gets cut off. I'm really sorry.
Moi, je vous entends avec des coupures, mais je vous entends quand même. J'ai écouté tout le monde.
I can hear you very well. I don't know what happens.
Voilà.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Dai, we cannot hear you anymore. No. No, no. No, it's difficult to follow the lead of what you're saying. We understood your point on the more regular conditions on the continent. But there's also the cooperation. Maybe you can finish with one single sentence. Yes, there's a different, as a conclusion, we have to have about cooperation between receiving and emitting populations countries. And this can be done with dialogue, in clusters. You have seen on the chart, on the map that was shown, how this could happen.
Les mêmes frontières, des frontières juxtaposées.
We have borders, and it is good for the governments of these countries to work together, that civil society works together. And that these countries go along with the sense of this. And then there's a question of data. We cannot keep on complaining that we do not have enough data.
Pour faire de la recherche, ils ont tous les moyens.
To do the research, they have all of the means necessary to use the statistics. And what strikes me is that we keep on receiving data 5 years behind schedule. That's what I wanted to say, madam. Thank you very much for listening to me. The Global Compact, no African country has a migration policy as such. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Dai. I'm sorry for that. And it would be for the African countries to get more. Thank you very much. for your intervention. I think we understand that we need further dialogue and cooperation between the states, but also with the civil society, and that there is a need of having data, but there are some data, and that's the last thing that we have been able to hear. Sorry for this unpleasant situation. I will now give the floor to the regional director of Western and Central Africa, Mrs. Argentina Matavel. Madam, you have the floor. And thank you for being so patient, Mrs. Matavel. Thank you, moderator. It is our role. So there's nothing to thank. I wish to greet everybody, especially His Excellency Mr. Nikolai Rasch, Ambassador for the of Denmark. I'm sorry that I have to close in English.
Migration, return and readmission of the Kingdom of Denmark, Mr. Foran, the Global Coordinator for the Mixed Migration Center, Mr. Nonemacher, the Deputy Regional Director, my own colleague from the IOM here in the region, all the partners here present, the representatives of the governments who participated in this study, all the panelists, the delegates and participants. We have now come to the end, to the end of today only, of intense and fruitful discussions, because this is a continuous discussion. It cannot be said to end today, but we must end somewhere for this discussion today on a subject that is as fascinating as it is political and strategic. That's the problem of youth mixed migration in West Africa. And as I saw in the comment box, we should also be looking into the same phenomenon in Central Africa, but also in East and Southern Africa as well. So your voices are being heard, those who have put the comments. Allow me to thank you today for your active engagement during the exchanges. The conclusions and recommendations of this meeting will inform national and regional migration policies, as Mali and Niger government representatives have brilliantly pointed out in their respective interventions. We do understand and hear you that every study obviously cannot encompass all the dimensions and variables of a topic. However, we did try to constrain this study to the topic that was given, looking at very specific aspects. But as the professor who spoke first in the panel said, there are other studies, obviously, that will complement, and there will be others that we will have to carry on. As Madame Diaye has said, we cannot continually claim that we have no data. If we are noticing that there's data that is missing, then let's make an effort to identify what it is, what are the indicators and variables that we're missing, so that then we can collect that data, be it in the regular surveys that exist, census, DHS and others, or dedicated studies. The panel today has clearly examined the good prospects of the Global Compact of Migration. I am pleased that UNFPA study on youth mixed migration today contributes to this compact. That document calls for safe, orderly, and regular migration, and emphasizes the need for collecting and using disaggregated migration data and as a basis for related policies. Tackling the issue of migration in West Africa and elsewhere is long overdue. The African Union's roadmap towards a demographic dividend calls for heavy investments in young people. It is our hope that today's deliberation will provide food for thought for the development of policies and programs, but also, and most especially, for concrete actions in favor of those many young people who continue to venture on perilous migratory routes. Ladies and gentlemen, much has been said, and my role is simply to thank each and every one of you on behalf of our Executive Director, Dr. Natalia Kanem, for your contributions to a debate that has long occupied everyone's minds for a few years now, but more so since we started seeing on TV screens the heart-wrenching images of young people, even children, and why not that famous young baby, Syrian baby on the shores of the island of Greece. When we see their able-bodied young people lost at sea and at the Sahara Desert. I would like to thank the Danish government in particular for agreeing to fund the second phase of the study covering the cities of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou. I congratulate the speakers and all those who worked behind the scenes for a successful meeting, namely partners from the Danish Refugee Council and UNFPA colleagues, and any other who contributed for putting together a dynamic technical team that carried out the study in a context doubly marked by the security crisis that we live in those countries, some of those countries today, and the effects of COVID-19. Language constraints would have been an obstacle to our effective discussion and participation today, but for the professionalism and commitment of our interpreters and the ICT staff, we thank you. Thanks to you, this session is being transmitted online in different languages, live. Our work does not end here. UNFPA is UNFPA, and now I know I speak for our partners too, IOM and others who engage in these studies and this work, is committed to continue searching and working towards solutions for the benefit of the people that we are called to serve, especially all young people, women and girls of Africa today. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and good day, good weekend to all.
Thank you, Mrs. Matavel. I think this is the end of this side event to the IMRF. I thank everyone for their participation, and we wish you a very nice day. Goodbye.